Welcome back to the podcast, What About Me? The podcast where we explore stories that challenge norms and elevate overlooked voices. I am your host, Linda, and I'm so glad you are here today. In this series, I've been diving into the topic of women's rights, and what better place to look than with the remarkable women of the Bible. Their stories have shaped the spiritual lives of countless Christian women today. These were women who stood firm in their time, women of courage, conviction, and resilience, who shaped the faith even in a world where their voices were often dismissed. In today's episode, I will take a closer look at Tamar, the daughters of Zerubbabel, and the Proverbs 31 woman. And I will draw parallels with the inspiring women leading, advocating, and influencing our world today. So stay with me as I uncover how sacred stories from the past still speak boldly into our present. Today is episode 5, and we'll be navigating through the women of the Bible, sacred text, and the silent struggles. Faith and freedom is where belief meets justice and history finds its voice. Here we continue our bold journey through the lens of women's rights. This episode takes us to the heart of ancient scripture and its ripple effect through time. We are unpacking the stories of women in the Bible, not just as figures of faith, but as symbols of resistance, resilience, and sometimes silence. How has these sacred narratives shaped our perceptions of womanhood? What happens when scripture is interpreted through patriarchal eyes, and how can reinterpretation revive hidden truths? Join me as we navigate the intersection of theology, tradition, and gender equality. Because understanding the past isn't just about history, it's about reclaiming voice and agency in the present. To understand women's rights within biblical context, we must first explore how scripture has been interpreted, not just what it says, but who gets to speak for it. Patriarchal framing of scripture. For centuries, religious texts were preserved, translated, and taught primarily by male scholars and clergy. This deeply influenced which female figures were highlighted: Eve as the origin of sin, Mary as the idea of submission, while other stories, like those of Deborah, the judge, or Huldah, the prophet, remained in the shadows. In ancient Israelite society and the early Christian world, women's voices were often undocumented or deemed secondary. Yet archaeology and apocryphal texts reveal active roles for women in religious life, from early deaconesses to prophetess. Medieval reinforcement. As the church gained institutional power in the Middle Ages, canon law and theology increasingly institutionalized gender roles. Women were often denied access to theological education, reinforcing dependency and diminishing their spiritual agency. Reformation and literacy. The Protestant Reformation challenged centralized religious authority, and with the advent of vernacular Bibles, women began engaging with scripture directly. Figures like Katharina Zell and Anne Hutchinson emerged, interpreting and teaching scripture in defiance of clerical norms. In the 20th century Reclamation, feminist theologians such as Phyllis Trible, Elizabeth Thaschler Fiorenza, and Mercy Amba Oduyoyi reclaimed biblical texts through a gender critical lens. Their work emphasized liberation, voice, and the reclamation of overlooked female figures. From interpretation to embodiment. As we trace the arc of history from patriarchal translation to modern feminist theology, it becomes clear that scripture is not static. Its meaning is shaped by the lens through which we read it. But what happens when we pause the analysis and simply listen to the women whose lives are woven into these sacred texts? Let's turn now to one such woman, a figure too often misunderstood, yet whose story holds both radical agency and enduring relevancy. She was cast aside by society, but never silenced by scripture. Her name is Tamar. In this segment, we will revisit Tamar's harrowing story, not through the gaze of shame, but through the eyes of justice, survival, and the pursuit of dignity. Because within her silence is a protest, and within her story lies a question that echoes into our time. Who decides which voices are worthy of being heard? Tamar's story, found in Genesis 38, is a tale often skipped in Sunday sermons, but its silence speaks volumes. She was a Canaanite woman, widowed not once but twice by the sons of Judah. According to the law, Levirate law, she had a right to protection, to lineage, to justice. But Judah, her father-in-law, denied her that right. He promised his youngest son to her, then left her in limbo. So Tamar took justice into her own hands. She veiled herself, posed as a prostitute, and orchestrated a confrontation that forced Judah to acknowledge both her dignity and his failure. When she was accused of immorality, Judah declared, "She is more righteous than I." In that one sentence, scripture turned our gaze. It called out hypocrisy and upheld the righteousness of a woman society tried to erase. Tamar's actions weren't simply survival, they were subversion. She exposed injustice within the very structure meant to protect her. And perhaps what's most radical is that she succeeded. Tamar re-entered the lineage not just of Judah, but of King David and ultimately of Jesus. She went from discarded widow to matriarch in the Messianic line. Her story reminds us that justice is not always granted. Sometimes it is claimed through courage, risk, and resistance. The Bible has presented women of strength, strategy, and social standing. When many think of Proverbs 31, they picture a domestic ideal, a virtuous woman, wife, tending to home and health. But a closer look reveals sometimes far more radical, a portrait of a multifaceted leader, economic force, and moral pillar. She is a businesswoman. She considers a field and buys it. With the fruit of her hands, she plants a vineyard. This isn't passive domesticity, it's savvy investment, entrepreneurship, and long term vision. She's a provider. She raises while it's still night and provides food for her household. Her labor is strategic and sustaining, not just for her family, but for her community. She's a teacher and dignitary. She opens her mouth with wisdom, and the teaching of kindness is on her tongue. Her words shape culture. Her dignity is not ornamental, it's influential. And significantly, she is respected at the city gates. That's where the elders gathered, where civic discourse happened. Her presence there signifies recognition in public sphere, not just private virtue, but social leadership. This passage isn't a checklist, it's a celebration, a poetic acknowledgement that women have for centuries carried economic, intellectual, and spiritual weight in their societies. It reminds us that leadership and provision are not modern concessions to women, they are ancient truths too often obscured. Modern echoes in the Proverb 31 legacy in today's woman. The woman in Proverb 31 isn't bound by time or culture. She's a blueprint of agency whose echoes resound in boardrooms, villages, parliaments, and protest lines around the world today. When we look at modern women who lead, nurture, and transform, we are not witnessing something new. We are witnessing something long recognized but often under acknowledged. Think of women like Ngozi Okojo, the Director General of the World Trade Organization, whose economic vision and diplomacy embody the strategists who laughs without fear of the future. Malala Yousafzai, who fought for girls' education with a courage that mirrors the Proverbs woman's strength and dignity. What about Wagari Maathai, whose environmental activisms uplifted entire communities, like the woman who considers a field and plants it, literally greening both the land and the lives it sustains? Or closer to the grassroots, countless unnamed women in markets, clinics, classrooms, and homes across Africa, Asia, and beyond. Women who provide, teach, heal, and lead, not in spite of their faith, but often because of their faith. These women aren't exceptions, they are part of a historical lineage. The Proverbs 31 woman isn't an impossible ideal or a distant relic. She's a mirror, and she's been here all along. For a global reflection, ancient wisdom, and contemporary power. Across continents and cultures, women have continued to rise, not just in defiance of limitation, but in fulfillment of a calling that's echoed through millennia. Whether shaped by sacred texts or resisting the misuse of them, women have long been architects of change within their communities. In South Asia, women lead self-help groups that lift entire villages out of poverty, offering microloans, education, and solidarity. In East Africa, women pastors and lay leaders shepherd faith communities with compassion and resolve, challenging gender norms by embodying Proverbs 31 strength. In Latin America, indigenous women activists protect ancestral lands with the same spiritual rootedness seen in ancient wisdom traditions. And in the Middle East, women scholars and reformers are interpreting religious texts with cultural fluency and theological depth, offering new paradigms rooted in justice, not hierarchy. What links them isn't geography or even religion, it's a posture of service, strategy, and sacred strength. These women are not anomalies, they are evidence. Evidence that leadership and provision aren't modern inventions for women of faith. They are reclaimed inheritances. Okay, let's reimagine scripture. The daughters who reshaped the law. Just as we might imagine the biblical world offered no space for women's public advocacy, five sisters stepped into history and rewrote it. Mahla, Noah, Hogla, Milcah, and Tirzah, the daughters of Zelophehad, stood before Moses, the priest Eliza, and the entire assembly. Their father had died with no sons, and by law his land would pass to male relatives, erasing his name and their security. But these women didn't accept invisibility. They asked, why should our father's name disappear from his clan because he had no sons? Give us property among our father's relatives. And here is what's extraordinary. Their case wasn't dismissed. God instructed Moses to grant their inheritance and further to change the law so other daughters would inherit in similar circumstances. This wasn't just personal justice, it was legal reform born of moral courage. These women were not prophets or queens. They were lay women, but they saw injustice, named it, and changed the system. Their story reminds us that sacred texts are not only about obedience, but about audacity. And it affirms something vital, that when women step forward, even the law can listen. Today's world, our daughters fight across borders. Just recently, in this year, 2025, actually, stories of women challenging silence are not confined to biblical schools. They are happening now in courtrooms, embassies, and across oceans. Take the story of Ifanaya, a Nigerian American woman whose father, a retired US citizen, fell into medical crisis while visiting Nigeria. Though he had granted power of attorney to his brother, that authority became a barrier. When her father could no longer speak for himself, it wasn't his daughter who could act, but his brother, because of the power of attorney. Blocked from providing care or even securing hospital access, Ifenaya faced layers of cultural expectations and legal paralysis. But like the daughters of Zerofehad before her, she refused to stay silent. She flew across continents, navigated bureaucracy, and through the help of the US Embassy, secured authorization to bring her father home for the care he desperately needed. Her story is not just about love, it's about rightful agency. Like those five sisters in Numbers 27, she questioned a structure that excluded her, and her persistency changed the outcome. In both stories, we see the same thread: women stepping forward not out of rebellion, but out of responsibility, refusing invisibility, demanding dignity, not just for themselves, but for those they are called to protect. Health is a fundamental human right, and denying someone access to proper medical care is a form of negligence. In many parts of Africa where regulatory oversight is minimal, medical malpractice remains alarmingly widespread. While Infanaye succeeded in rescuing her father from such a broken system, countless others remain trapped. This situation also highlights another pressing issue: the gender dynamics of decision making. Inheritance and authority often default to sons or male relatives based on outdated norms that assume women lack the capacity to lead or protect. Because Ifanaya was a daughter, her father, adhering to cultural tradition, appointed his brother as power of attorney. That decision became a barrier. Instead of fulfilling his duty, the brother neglected his responsibilities, misused funds meant for medical care, and left the father vulnerable. But Ifanaya challenged those norms. She fought for her father's dignity and medical freedom. And here lies the bitter irony. While her father's retirement money continued to flow into a Nigerian account each month, it was being siphoned off by relatives, used for indulgence, not treatment, while he suffered without care. This is not just a story of personal triumph. It's a call to reassess who we trust with power and why. Daughters must never be overlooked, especially when they are often the ones most willing to stand in the gap. I've seen the medical challenges in Africa with my own eyes. During the height of COVID-19 lockdowns, a time of uncertainty, fear, and medical overwhelm, my father's health began to spiral. He was admitted to hospital, and despite every test and scan, the doctors found no clear cause. Still, his condition worsened. We were desperate for answers, but clearly never came. Then came a suggestion: a surgery, a procedure prompted by a minor symptom, recommended at a time when hospitals were strained and lives were slipping away by the day. Something in me paused, not out of fear, but discernment. We negotiated the procedures, the risks, even the prices. And at that moment, I knew we needed a second opinion, a different voice in the room. So I urged my father to seek another hospital. And there finally came clarity. No surgery, no invasive invasions, just oral medication. That's all he needed. And to this day, he's never needed that surgery. It was a moment that taught me something sacred. Daughters can carry instinct wisdom, the quiet courage to say, this doesn't really feel right. Sometimes it takes that feeling of not feeling right. Just like the daughters of Zerubbabel, like Ephaniah crossing oceans for her father. I stood in the gap because too often daughters are dismissed, seen as emotional, irrational, or secondary in decision making. But we are not. We are guardians. We are interpreters of silence, advocates when others are passive. And when we speak, it isn't rebellion, it's responsibility. From the ancient cries of Tama and the bold petitions of Zerubbabel's daughters to the modern courage of women like Ifanaye, and my own journey as a daughter navigating crisis, one truth resounds. Women have always stood in the gap, not with spectacles, but with discernment, not always welcomed, but always needed. The scripture may have been written in patriarchal times, but they pulse with stories of women who refuse silence and shape justice with their presence. And so we reflect, what might our world look like if we not only remembered these women, but listened to them, if we trusted the intuition of daughters, the leadership of sisters, the counsel of mothers. The Proverbs 31 woman wasn't a lone exception. She was one of many, and she lives on today in every woman who negotiates care, challenges systems, and builds futures from the margins. So, to every listener, especially to every woman who has ever second guessed herself, her own voice, I leave you with this. Your advocacy is sacred. Your discernment is wisdom. Your story is part of the lineage. May we carry this truth not just in scripture, but in system, not just in memory, but in movement. Because justice doesn't begin in the halls of power. It often begins with one woman standing in the gap and refusing to move. Stand in that gap, women. You are powerful, you are wise, you are discerning, and you are leaders. Just as the woman in Proverbs 31, you can hold the truth and sit among the leaders.